Hello and welcome. This session of the Task Management and Time Blocking Summit is all about the concept of stage gates, what they are, how they work, and how you can put them to use to make your processes and your projects more productive. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a minute and introduce myself. As you can see on the screen, my name is Gelwicks. And if you're a listener of the Productivity Cast podcast, the odds are pretty good you've heard me. Now, I'm also a blogger over at the Idea Pump, and I also host my own podcast called Being Productive, and I get to show up every so often on the Anything But Idle podcast. I'm also the founder of the OneNote for Professionals community on Facebook. But most importantly, I've got more than 30 years in technology and productivity consulting, specifically around helping people be more efficient and more effective in the work that they have to do. There's a lot of things I've encountered over the years and a lot of different techniques and tools. And today's topic of stage gates is one of my favorites because it's probably one of the easiest ones I've found to make a big difference in how you're able to do things in a short order of time. So let's take a minute and talk about this term stage gates. Specifically, what the heck are they? Now, it may not be a term you're familiar with, or you might just have heard it before. Often the term is familiar, but it's confused with other similar terms, or worse yet, it's understood, but it's still really confusing in its application. So let's start off with defining what the term stage gate really means. Now, the Cambridge English Dictionary defines a stage gate as something that's used to describe a point in a project or a plan at which development can be examined and any important changes or decisions relating to costs, resources, profits, etc. can be made. Now, when I hear this definition, the most important parts to me are examined, changed, and decisions. You see, a stage gate is your opportunity to make sure everything is on track before proceeding. Now, also, based on this definition, if you're familiar with project management, you might be saying to yourself, hey, that sounds like a milestone. I know what that is. And you'd be right. It does sound like a milestone. But in reality, it's much, much more. How about we take a look at the difference between the two and see if it helps us get a better understanding of stage gates on their own. The term milestone conjures up very specific images for many people of road trips and car rides. You see, this is where the term milestones came from, and in the context of projects and processes, it does have significant relevance. Now, if you've ever taken a road trip of any distance, the odds are pretty good you've seen a thing called a mile marker, or at least here in the US, that's what we call them. I don't know what they call them in the rest of the world because everybody else has moved to metric. So unfortunately, we're going to stick with mile markers for this example. Now, a mile marker on a highway has a very specific purpose. It tells you how far from the specific point of origin of the highway you have traversed along the highway, at what point you are in distance. So if you're at mile marker 87, it means you are 87 miles away from the beginning of the highway. Kind of stands to logic. What that helps you learn is if, for example, the exit that you need to get off of is at mile marker 97, you're 10 miles away. You also know how far the original point of origin of the highway is. So you can have a good understanding as to how long it's going to take you to get to a specific spot and how many more miles you have left behind. Well, this is great, but it doesn't give you a lot of additional information that you really need to have a successful trip. It doesn't tell you Oh, I don't know. If you're going to run out of gas before you reach that milestone. It's not designed to do that. It is literally just a fixed, consistent, repeating measure that allows you to determine progress. But when we think about that in context to stage gates, we realize there's a lot more information that we can glean from what a stage gate can provide. Now, I know the road trip analogy may be a little bit tough at times because it seems overly simplistic. So let's see if I can provide you a better context. Let's do it from the world of sports. Specifically, how about track and field? Now, if we think about track and field, I'm going to specifically pull out two races that you've probably seen if you've ever watched the Olympics. The odds are pretty good during a track and field event. You've seen these two races run. One is the hurdles, and the other is a relay race. Now, if we think about the hurdles, let's say it's a 100-meter hurdles. The distance of the race is 100 meters, as is said in the name. The hurdles are set up at very specific distances along that track, and the runner has to jump over each of the hurdles before they reach the finish line without knocking anything over. It's very important to keep in mind that those hurdles are at fixed distances on the track. The cadence and the timing of the runner is set, counts on those being consistent. So they know when they've cleared the third hurdle or the fourth hurdle or the fifth hurdle, they should be running at a particular speed to get to that finish line as fast as they want to get to it. There's no other information, though, that's provided by those hurdles. There's nothing that they're there to help you adjust to. It's just a thing. If we think about relay racing, though, and let's use, for example, the 4x100 meter relay race. Well, now we've got a different conversation entirely, because we're still dealing 100-meter distance, but at the end of that distance, there's a transition that occurs. There's a handoff of the baton that's being carried by the first runner to the second runner. And in that short period of handoff, those few meters of transition, there's a wealth of information that's passed and processed by both runners and between both runners. The runner coming up adjusts their speed to match the runner ahead of them. The runner ahead of them is trying to get a good pace and get moving forward so they can leave the transition section as quickly as possible. They both have to concentrate on the handoff of that baton so that it doesn't get dropped and it's not fumbled. And just a minor detail, a minor break in that mindset can derail their entire stride and slow them down and ultimately cause them to lose the race. So if we think about a relay race as our example, those transition points are truly what we're expecting when it comes to stage gates. Now, one of the other things that I hear a lot is, oh, stage gates. Well, I can do this easy. I can just create repeating tasks in my project, and every time this task comes around, I'll do my evaluation. But that's not what a stage gate is either. Repeating tasks are actually much closer to the hurdles we talked about a minute ago. See, repeating tasks in and of themselves aren't telling me anything. The task may tell me to do an evaluation or to do an analysis, and that's great. But it's that analysis or that evaluation that's going to give me that information. That's what makes a stage gate. A stage gate doesn't occur at a specific point in time, but it occurs when a specific confluence of events happen. So don't confuse stage gates with an individual task. They are different. They serve different purposes. But yes, they both can and in most cases should exist within your processes and your projects. So what goes into a stage gate? If we're trying to start to define this a little bit more closely to where we can apply it to something, we need to understand what's the component parts of a stage gate. And just keep in mind, any project or processes can have multiple stage gates, often should. The examples I'll give you later on only have one or two, but that's just for example purposes. Most processes that I've seen have a number of different stage gates. But what's important for any given stage gate? Well, one, you have to know who's going to cross through the gate. Stage gates are not typically just a data exercise. They're not what I want to call unsupervised in their activity. There's usually one or more people involved in that stage gate because that person is tied to responsibility for completion of the requirements of the stage gate. And we'll dig into that more later. You also need to know what do you have to make that crossing. Not so much the person, but what needs to go along with that person. What does that person need to provide? You'll hear it referred to as an artifact or a deliverable. Or if we go back to our relay race, what's the baton that that person needs to hand off as part of that stage gate? Maybe it's not even a handoff. Maybe they're taking it with them, but they're just crossing that point, confirming that they have a good grip on it and they're able to move forward. Every stage gate should also help you understand what happens if you can't complete that stage gate. If you fail to meet the requirements of that gate, what are the ramifications of it? Do you have to go all the way back to the beginning? Do you have to just go back a step? Or you just have to wait until everything reaches culmination and then you can transition through that gate? And finally, how do you measure successful or failed crossings through the gate? How do you mark that? And how do you know that it met the criteria accordingly? This is a really important piece of the equation because this is where the value of stage gates comes in. It's understanding this measure and being able to translate this measure into analysis and learnings to allow you to adapt and improve your projects and your processes is where all the value of stage gates come from. So when we think about this a little deeper around each of these four main categories, it's more than just the person doing the work in the first case. It's not only that individual, but who also is responsible for approving that work. So often you have multiple parties involved. And in a stage gate methodology, well, that approver is often more important than the actual person doing the work because it's their name attached to it, that they said that yes, this met all the requirements of this stage gate and it is able to move forward. Knowing who those people are, getting their buy-in and their commitment that their name is going to be going on everything transitioning through this gate is critical to the continuing success. Now, when we think about things necessary to make that crossing over, well, that could be anything. It could be a document. It could be a video. It could be a PowerPoint presentation, a worksheet. It could be a specific set of figures, a completed form, a printout. Could be a physical object in many cases, a package that needs to be shipped out. The key thing is to understand that whatever is required to successfully get through this gate has to be clearly documented, decided upon, and agreed to, so that everybody knows that if something goes through this gate and it did not have this thing, that's a violation of the gate. It's a breach. If we think about the schedule, what happens if you can't cross? Well, often it's not just a yes or no situation. In many cases, you may have a couple of steps that things have to go back before they can approach the gate again. Maybe there's rework that has to be done. Or it could be something significant enough that this is a big, critical, world-tipping type of stage gate within your project or your processes that if it's time to go through that gate and you don't have all the requirements, that triggers things like escalations and vice president meetings and all kinds of craziness. Understanding what happens when you can't go through the gate is almost as important as understanding what it takes to go through the gate. And finally, talking about the measurement. And this is something I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about in a little bit. is important to understand not only who and what and when, but how they relate to each other, because this all drives future decision making. So let's take something that we're all very familiar with, and the process of hiring someone. And I know it's oversimplified, but I'm going to try and keep it pretty straightforward. So we have a job posting. From that job posting, we receive applications. We review those applications and schedule phone interviews. We review those phone interviews and we schedule in-person interviews if we're pre-COVID, hopefully post-COVID as well. And ultimately, we either review or approve or reject the people who have come in. So if we think about our process up to this point and our definitions up until this point, each one of these steps could conceivably be a milestone in the process. We've gone through and posted jobs. We've gotten applications. We've gone through the reviews and so on. They're points along this path to hiring someone. But now let's introduce some stage gates into the equation. So we're going to put a stage gate in between the review of the applications and scheduling the phone interviews, and just talk through this a little bit. See, when we think about this particular step, before we can schedule phone interviews, there's a number of things that have to happen. Parts of a stage gate are determined by being able to take those learnings and translate them into something that's going to improve or adapt the project or the process. And the measurement of the time between it takes to get from gate 1 to gate 2 to gate 3, well, this is all critical as well. So as we start to work this into our process and we go back and we think about the hiring process a little bit, we can start to see how a stage gate keeps us from making mistakes. So let's take stage gate 1 here, for example. If we take our definition from earlier, well, we have to know who. The people responsible for transitioning through stage gate 1 are the interviewers. To do the interview, they have to have the applications in hand. They have to have the resumes in hand. They have to have the background checks that were to be done. They have to have the social media profiles maybe that were dug up. All of those pieces have to be in place before you can cross that gate and start to schedule the phone interviews. What we also want to track, though, to optimize this process over time, is to be able to record when each deliverable becomes available and ultimately when these interviews get scheduled. And we'll talk about why this is important next. See, if I create a stage gate map, simplified grid, that allows me to track not only the things that have to happen, I also want to track when they happen. Now, often we'll think about this from a task listing. We'll create a task list, a repeatable task list in many cases, where we show all the different steps that we have to go through to schedule a phone interview. Did you get the approval? Did you get the application? Did you get the resume? Did you get the background check? And so on. And those are checkboxes. And if you have all those, you can go schedule the phone interview. Well, this is why I say a stage gate is much more powerful. Because here, not only are we tracking that those things happened, but we're also tracking when they happened. And the purpose of that is twofold. One, as you can see here, it makes it very easy to tell when something's ready to cross through that stage gate. The first one for that data analyst role, well, that's not ready to schedule the phone interview yet. Why? Because the CV hasn't been approved yet. The second one, the developer role, absolutely is ready to go because all of those steps are in there. And this, if you're looking at this from a pure task execution process, you're probably going, yeah, but I do that. We have those checklists. We go through those checklists. This isn't really any different than what happens on a normal basis. And you'd be absolutely right. Where it becomes different is the next step. As you can see, the benefit of having the dates themselves as the transition points not only indicate that the work was done, not only indicate when it was done, but give us the opportunity to calculate delays, specifically around transitions between one gate to the next. So you can see that the first role, the data analyst role, it took 4 days for the CV to be received in. It took another 2 days to get the background in hand, and it took 3 days to get the social media evaluation in hand as well, totaling out to 7 days across the entire position filling, or at least scheduling for the phone interview. The developer role was a little bit more complicated though. The developer role was posted on the 15th of January, but we didn't get a CV back until February 9th. The CV was reviewed and approved. The background check was received by the 14th. The social media was received actually before that on the 12th. So when we look at the durations, we can see right away that the biggest gap was around receiving the actual CV for that particular role. We can see that taking the background check took longer for some reason, and the social media time took the exact same as what we thought. This allows us to start to analyze our process more effectively. Now I can ask questions like, why did it take 25 days for us to get a CV for that particular role? And I can go back and evaluate how the role was written. Maybe I posted it in the wrong spot. Maybe I didn't provide enough information to go along with the role. Any number of different things could come into play. I also noticed that the background took longer. I'd be curious about that to see if there's a consistency around that type of role requiring a longer background check, or was there some other thing that crept in the way? My social media requirements seem to be falling fairly consistently. So that all fits into an evaluation and adjustment of our process. See, this is why stage gates can be so critical, because they give you the opportunity to not only compare against different things moving through the gates, but also allow you to compare against your standards. As a process, we may have decided that getting CVs in should only take 2 days from when the position's posted, and yet everything we're posting is taking longer than that. It's absolutely worth investigating, and it's very likely that we may either have to choose alternative methods, find better ways to post our jobs, or maybe even revisit that service level of 2 days and determine, was it realistic in the first place? We also get the opportunity to determine against our service levels, is something either highly, I want to say, out of whack on both the positive and the negative side. If I look consistently at this data analyst role, I can see that I've got a 7-day total. Well, let's just say, for sake of argument, that the majority of the job postings we have are coming back within the 7 to 14 day range, and yet our service level could be, 21 days. Does it need to be then? Can we tighten up that service level just because the data that we're getting from our stage gates is telling us that that's okay to do, and it's consistent, and it's giving us an opportunity to evaluate and adapt? This is the value of stage gates. They give us that opportunity to stop, think, and change. Now, there are a lot of other benefits that come hand in hand with stage gates. For example, the ability to identify bottlenecks. Looking at these data pieces coming through in these data points, you may determine that in your process, there's one particular point that things are just getting hung up. And maybe that's part of the process. Maybe it's the people involved. Maybe it's the deliverable. Maybe there's a report that has to be transitioned from one group to another that's just exceptionally complicated in this particular case. And if you simplify that particular report, all of a sudden things flow freely. It's very important to utilize this kind of learning and data to find where challenges are happening. And don't think it's just specific process executions. You may find it's particular use cases within the process. Go back to our example previously, we may find that the developer job postings are the ones with the problem in the process, and they have a particular bottleneck that's occurring because they're a developer job posting that doesn't happen with a data analyst. But you wouldn't be able to tell that, and you'd never know if you didn't have those stage gates that were helping you capture that data and giving you the opportunity to evaluate and change. Stage gates also allow you to manage for edge cases and exceptions to your process. Let's say you're hiring for an executive role. Well, that has a whole different set of requirements and it allows you to pull those out of the normal process requirements and be able to deal with those separately, knowing that the stage gates are going to continue to monitor everything else moving through. That way, everything isn't an exception, just the ones that need to be. Stage gates also give you the ability to do parallel tracking. I mentioned earlier about the data analyst and the developer. If we look at those two paths, I could have 4, 5, 6 different job postings out there currently, and by using the stage gates, I can see where all of them stood. So I would know at any given time that, oh, I have 4 that have crossed the approval gate for doing phone interviews, therefore I'm going to fill 4 phone interview slots on Friday. I'm much more effective that way. I can block out my time more effectively, but I wouldn't know that these have reached that point without the stage gates to tell me. It also gives me opportunities for improvement, chances to find weaknesses in the process where I can then go back, adapt, modify, and improve and see, and this is probably the most important part, see if those changes make any difference at all. When we think about stage gates, it's important to throw some additional examples around this, some context, so that we're ready to go try this out with our own systems. So think about, for example, you may use stage gates to help identify a team that's having a series of challenges within a process. So your process may involve multiple different groups working together. You have parallel tracks of activity going on, and it just seems that these 4 or 5 different engagements are just getting hung up, or these processes are just getting hung up and slowed down. Well, stage gates can help you identify maybe there's a team that's having a challenge with it. Maybe there's an individual that needs some retraining, or maybe they're just having a problem and they're not bringing it to you. And this is your opportunity to go back to them and say, hey, what's the hang up here? How can I help you out? It also gives us an opportunity, again, to find adequate lead time. So if we think about this from historical data to improve projects, for example, if we have these stage gates within our process of this project, we're able to then say, okay, I know that consistently this series of steps, for example, functional requirements gathering, takes 14 days. Why? Because the stage gates of getting through to a completed functional requirement are telling me that it's 14 days. Well, this gives me the opportunity to now figure out lead times, to go back and say, okay, if we need it by this date, I can figure back 14 days and feel safe. Or maybe I want to figure back 21 days just to provide a buffer. But I'm confident, based on the data provided by the stage gates, that this is going to be accurate. It also gives me an opportunity to really create some dashboards and some consistent measurements to put things in front of people and make sure everybody's aware of what's going on. A great example are multiple database tools, Excel, SharePoint, any number of different applications that allow you to look at things with lists and views of lists. Stage gates allow you to apply filters to those and say, just show me everything that's ready to go through this stage gate. And I say that from a process efficiency standpoint, because if I'm going to schedule a meeting where we're going to approve things moving through the stage gate, I only want to look at the things that are ready to go through. Everything else has no bearing on this particular meeting. So if I want maximum efficiency, why would I address something that is still waiting for the CV to show up? I wouldn't. But this is an easy way, structurally, to be able to go into that meeting and say, yep, we have 4 things ready to talk about. And you know that those 4 things are worth the time of the multiple people sitting in that session and the decisions that are going to come about from it. So how do I put it to use? First, review your processes. Look at them carefully. Look at your flowcharts, look at your outlines, look at your documents, look at your task list. Look at everything and determine, are there some opportunities to put some gates in there to understand I'm ready to go to the next step in the process. If it's project management and you have project templates, I guarantee you will find opportunities for stage gates as soon as you look at them. They tend to stand out. Transitions between major phases of a project is a great example of that. If you're dealing with a process, it may be a little bit more involved, but take a look at it and see. I'm willing to bet that putting in those review points, you will be able to find them in fairly short order. Next, define your measures. Figure out, what are you going to measure? Is it going to be time? Is it going to be quantity? Is it going to be quality? Is it going to be any number of those combinations? My suggestion, focus on time, because time typically has the greatest impact on processes because they occur over time, and it gives you the greatest visibility into challenges. It's measurable, it's not subjective, and it gives you a clear set of numerical values to then be able to go back and ask, where's this number coming from? Define how you're going to capture this information. Create a structure. Set up a tool. Invest in a tool. Build a tool. Whatever you want to do. Put something together that's going to allow you to capture and then very clearly and analytically review the data that you're capturing around these gates. And I can't stress this last piece enough. Implement it. Test it. Evaluate your stage gates just as much as you evaluate the things going through those gates, modify them as necessary, and repeat. Do that over and over and over again. Stage gates are not a once and done thing. They are your way of putting in those controls, and those controls should evolve with your processes just the same way your processes should evolve with what you're trying to do. So thank you for spending some time today to learn about stage gates and how they might be helpful to you. If you take the opportunity to integrate stage gates into your processes and your projects, I think you're going to see the benefits very quickly. And if you do, or if you have a challenge doing it, I want to hear about it. So you can either track me down on the internet, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or you can come visit me at theideapump.com. If you want to learn more about this topic and other topics related to being more productive and more effective, well, why don't you give a listen to Productivity Cast, or even better, the Being Productive podcast. In either case, and in any of the cases, I wish you the best of luck with doing this and trying this out. And as I said, if you have a challenge or a success, let me know. Good luck.